Well, thank you all for being here this evening. And Ria, thank you for the kind introduction. Actually, Paul, I met Paul last night. We had a fabulous dinner, and I have to admit, it's the first time I had his whiskeys and thoroughly enjoyed it. So I'm very glad that we're doing this today and share your story, what seems a really interesting story with the group. Paul, tell us how it all began. I'm curious, when did you get into the spirits business, and what was the inspiration?
Yeah, okay. When I finished my education, I started thinking of getting into some business, and the first venture, of course, I got into something else totally unrelated. It was making biscuits, and then I ran it for 2 years, and I couldn't make it. I had to shut shop, and literally run away because I owed a lot of people money, and of course I had to receive a lot of money, and I had a stack of checks which all bounced. And those days, there's nothing you could do about those checks, and then. It was a nice learning. It was a tough period for me because when whatever my dad had given me to start business was all over, and he was like, "Okay, that's it. I have more kids, and I can't keep supporting you all the time." But then, thankfully, he managed to, give me some more money to start the distillery. My father was in trading of alcohol. He mainly was in country liquor in India. I mean, in South in Karnataka. And during the course of the business, it was related, so he started some retail shops also. So that actually gave me the base that when I started, I was making alcohol for the local market, mainly for the, the domestic, the brands that have huge turnover with very little margins. But the shops that he had those days, he had about 25 retail shops in the region called Coorg. So that gave me some minimum quantity orders that I would get from him on a regular basis. So that helped me to establish in the early days. But then as things went along, somewhere around in 1995, I launched the brand Original Choice Whisky. And then from there on, it took off, and it's now reached to a stage where we're one of the largest selling brands in the world.
But how many years before 95 when were you doing the more country liquor? Was it a couple of years? Is that?
Yeah, 92 I started manufacturing. I got into Indian-made foreign liquor, brandy, whiskey, and rum. So I started in 92 with a lot of other local brands. But in 95 was when I decided to make the brand called Original Choice Whisky, and then it took off.
And tell me why. I understand 95. Tell us about the sort of regulatory regime at that time, from licensing to distribution. I know you had a little bit of a base with the retail shop, but how difficult was it, the environment at that time?
Yeah, as in all states, alcohol business is normally, you're termed to be a thug and a politician combination. So, well, we had to go through that same thing. And getting licenses those days, fortunately, Bangarappa was the chief minister at the time, and he decided to issue, almost 32 licenses were issued at the time. But till that time, the demand for alcohol, or rather the manufacturing capacity for alcohol, was less than what the demand was. So the distilleries that were licensed before this regime, they all had a completely different attitude. It's like we were wholesalers also. My dad was running wholesale in the area the way he had his retail shops. So I remember those days, even when I was in college and school, he would send me to make payments to them, and we would be sitting with cash. Those days, a lot of cash business used to take place, and we'd be waiting for 3-4 hours to actually just pay the money to these manufacturers so that they can supply stock to us. And they would just make you sit and wait outside, and that was the regime that was going on for many years.
Demand-supply imbalance.
Yeah, the demand-supply imbalance was very skewed, and once these 32 licenses were issued, the game changed completely, and all those guys that were there, they were not able to sustain the kind of an onslaught that the new generation people started, and then, we were literally supplying to the wholesaler and telling them, okay, you pay me when you sell it, whereas these guys were sitting with, like, give me advance money, and then, if I feel like I'll supply you, kind of a situation. So that actually propelled us into a completely different league after that.
And what was the catalyst for Paul John, what we have today? What really started from Original Choice? What was the catalyst for getting into single malts?
Honestly speaking, the alcohol business was not something that I enjoyed. I mean, it was something that I had to be in because, I mean, there seemed to be a lot of money in it, and for the last, I mean, from the time I started for the first 10 years or 12 years, I did it. And then, dealing with the wholesalers and the retailers was, I mean, somehow, I mean, not something that I was enjoying doing, but okay, I did it. Over a period of time, I started traveling, and then I got into wine. So we have, the Big Banyan wines we launched. We still have it, but it's very regional. We are slowly expanding, but again, there's a lot of competition, so I'm not getting into this 1:1 situation. So our production is limited, but we have a nice fan following for people that like wine in the Big Banyan also. And then after that, I progressed from that into single malts. I used to drink the general, the Glenfiddich and the Glenmorangie and things like that. And over a period of time, I decided that this was something that I liked. I was enjoying the single malts. And then I decided that since I'm in the alcohol business, why not? And then India never had, although Amrut had started a little earlier, but they were at their nascent stages. And I had no idea that they were also working on it. And then I decided to do a lot of research because in the initial stages, we were just given to understand that only Scotland can make single malts, and you need the water, you need the climate, and nobody had done it elsewhere. So that, the curiosity that okay, there must be something because otherwise somebody would have done it. So I made a lot of trips to Scotland. I went to all the distilleries, tasted their stuff, then tasted their water. Went to a lot of these streams that they have that that produces the water that they use. In fact, I brought back some water and got it tested over here. I didn't find anything great, nothing great. We had even better water than that. So then that gave me a lot of confidence that, yeah, we can try to do something. But it was a long shot. But I mean, now if you ask me, I would definitely wouldn't take a risk like that. But at that time, I was still young, didn't bother too much about the repercussions, and we started putting up the plant. So it took me about 5 years to complete the plant. And then again, maturation. We started the maturation not knowing where it's going to go, for how long it's going to go. And then as we keep testing it, we found some, it was encouraging. I mean, there's a long story about that also, but that I'll tell you. It's a longer story about that.
No, I'll get to that. I want to, talk about, you talked about Scotch whiskey and single malt. Like champagne has provenance to a certain region in France. I think tequila can only be called tequila if it comes from, from Mexico. Is there a provenance sort of trademark to I know there is for Scotch, but is it for single malt as well?
No, single malt.
Or whiskey as well? Or?
No, whiskey and single malt. Whiskey is anything that can be made out of grain spirit. Typically, that's how it should be. Unfortunately, we never followed any of those rules in India. Typically because when the Britishers came, they just wanted to give the Indians, something to drink in alcohol, and then that is how they termed it as IMFL. If you look at most of the countries, it's Indian-made foreign liquor. So they were just actually taking molasses-based alcohol, adding whiskey flavor for whiskey, adding a little caramel so that it's a little lighter, and calling it whiskey. And for the brandy, they would add a brandy flavor and give it a little more color, so it gets a little darker, and they call it brandy. And then for the rum, they would add some flavor and then give it a lot more color, make it dark, and then they would call it rum. And that's how most of the whiskey, brandy, and rum, basically it's the same stuff that you're drinking. And that's how, we in India, even till today, most of the whiskey, brandy, and rum is made, is not, there is no thing. But internationally, if it is rum, it has to be made from sugarcane-based alcohol. If it is brandy, it has to be from grape spirit. But fortunately, now the FSSAI has come and brought in some rules. Earlier, there was no FSSAI, so I could do anything and call it whiskey, and I could do anything and call it brandy. And to a large extent, even when I started single malts, I could do anything and call it a single malt also. Now that has changed, fortunately.
I read somewhere that in the UK, and we'll come to the trade agreement a little later in the conversation, but I read somewhere that it has to be aged or matured for a minimum of 3 years for it to be called whiskey, or is that inaccurate?
No, in most countries they have, especially for whiskeys, it has to be aged in wooden cask of not more than either 300 or 500 liters per cask size for a minimum of 3 years.
So that's where it came from.
And one more thing, To call it Scotch, it has to be made in Scotland. But to call it single malt, it can be anywhere. But the definition is it has to be made in one distillery from a single grain. From a single grain. And in most countries, the minimum maturation is 3 years also in wooden casks. So that's the definition for it to be called a single malt whiskey.
So there is a minimum maturation.
Yeah, right now there is that.
I have a few more questions about that, but before we do that, I know we're all tasting your very tasty whiskeys. Tell us a little bit about under the Paul John sort of banner today. What are the various expressions that you have in terms of? I know you've got. Is it 6?
No, I think totally we may be having around 12 or 13 varieties other than the single cask that we launch. But we have the flagship, which is the Brilliance Edited and Bold. The Brilliance is a 46% non-chill filtered, non-peaty whiskey. The Edited is, again, a 46%, all the brands are non-chill filtered. And again, I'll take you a step.
What is non-chill filtered?
Yeah, I'll take you a step back on that. Typically, what commercial manufacturers of single malts do is that before they bottle it, they drop the temperature to about 2, 3, or even up to 0 degrees temperature. So what happens in that is the oils in the alcohol crystallize when the temperature is dropped. And then it is filtered through a 2 micron, 0.2 or a 0.3 micron filter. So it removes those oils. The reason why they do it is that, you will not find for it to not have sediments, over a period of time. If you have oils, there are chances that it can crystallize and sediment down. And for some people, it may look unpalatable. So they don't want to take this risk, especially when they are doing in huge commercial production. The big daddies do it. But I am a strong believer that the oils in the alcohol give it that texture, that feel, that smoothness, and like any other food, the more the oil, the more tastier it is. Of course, it's not healthy, but the same situation in this also, I'm a big advocate of not chill filtering, and we keep it at 46% because if it is non-chill filtered and if we bring the alcohol strength less than 46%, the liquid will be milky in color. So you will not see that sharp shine in this whiskey, and if you add little water in it, it will become milky. It's because the oils are interacting with the water. But then that's what gives it the taste.
So it gives it the flavor. I know your distillery, well, you've got a few distilleries now, but your first distillery or your main distillery is in Goa, is that correct?
No, I actually started my first production of the Original Choice brand for the first 10 years of my alcohol distilling business. I operated from that factory. It was the same.
The old biscuit.
It was the same premises that I ran the biscuit factory. After I was able to recover and settle with some people, pay back some people, and get them to write off the rest, I scrapped the biscuit machinery, and then I put up the bottling plant over there. Of course, we started with 250 cases a day production, and now we sell about 20 lakh cases a month.
But the Paul John distillery is in Goa, is that correct?
Yeah, the factory that produces the single malts and the gin is in Goa, and the pot stills are in Goa.
And why Goa? Because I've noticed that there's a lot of new, and I want to get your view on some of the new age sort of Indian-made liquors that are there, but a lot of them seem to be distilling in Goa. Is there a particular reason why Goa?
One is the regime is very free. They are a lot more, friendly to alcohol business. But excuse me. The reason I put up my plant in Goa is because the younger days I loved Goa. I used to go there practically every year during Christmas, and that is a typical this thing. And so when I was doing the business in and Goa was very liquor friendly. Licenses were easily available, unlike the restrictions that we have in most states and including in Karnataka. So I decided to start a distillery purely because of my love for Kerala. For Goa. And that was not when I decided. Those days I never had the single malt in my mind. It was just to make alcohol to supply, like I was supplying to all other states and in Goa also. Alcohol is very regulated. So typically, especially for the lower end whiskies, you have to produce it in that state to sell it in the states, because otherwise getting it from one state to the other state, there's a lot of red tapeism. You have an export duty, you have an import duty. then permit to transport it, all that is not viable.
Is that still the case today?
It's still the case because in the constitution, the liquor is still a state subject, and so every state has its own laws and rules, and then they all have different laws and rules, and they all charge an export fee and an import fee, and all sorts of things. So it's very complicated.
I mean, I'm interested because we all talk about ease of doing business. We're all in the business world in different capacities. Has it got better? Has it got more streamlined, or from the days when you started?
Unfortunately, alcohol has got even more stricter, as the day, because now everybody looks at us as a cash bag, and the other thought process is they are rogues and thieves. I mean, typically the first thought process of anybody, especially a politician when he sees you.
But you're paying, in the sense that you're feeding a lot of the exchequer, state exchequer, a lot of revenue, so they should actually have a different view. But they don't give any credit to that. I think it's.
I mean, now slowly that, especially for example in Karnataka, I think more than 30-35% of the state's actual revenue, they present a budget of 1.5 lakhs, per year. But they collect about 1 lakh. The remaining is all, and then the alcohol contribution is about 35,000 crores per year. So almost 30% of the revenue that the state gets in a year, and in most states it's the same situation. It's a substantial amount. So as far as keep making sure that supplies come, for example, COVID time. For example, in Bangalore factory we have about 800 employees. They never asked us to shut it down even for a day. We ran all the COVID working days. Also, there was 800 people working in one spot. The most dangerous situation during the time, if you all remember, the situation in the start of COVID. But they made sure that we kept the factory running because,
essential services.
Yeah, we were more priority than essential services.
No, but that's really interesting. So through the first wave, the worst, when everything was shut down, your manufacturing of liquor was permitted.
Excepting for the first 2 months was chaos. Nobody knew what was going on. So I think they shut everything down. And so those 2 months, we were shut. But once they eased out a little bit, and then...
I remember the lines outside, people waiting to pick up liquor and stocking up their homes. Yeah. I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I know for myself, I think I drank more during those 2-3 months sitting at home. Yeah, I think we all did.
Yeah, because after a month, I started getting a lot of calls, can you give me a bottle? It's like...
I'm going to take you back to Goa for a minute. I read somewhere obviously the weather there is a lot warmer than Scotland. And tell us a little bit. I read something that was quite intriguing, but I'd like you to tell and share that how that has an impact on the process of maturing the alcohol.
Yeah. Unlike Scotland, I think more than 6 months in a year they are frozen, so nothing happens, including no business, nobody walks around. Here we don't have any of those things. All through the year there is a lot of humidity and there's a lot of this thing goes on. So the liquid is acting. There's a lot of reaction that goes on in the liquid all through the year. And so the maturation is almost 4 times at the pace at what happens in Scotland. So we lose about 8 to 10%, of course, depending on where the cask is. Right on top.
Evaporation.
Yeah, the angel share evaporates. Whereas in Scotland, it's 2% per year is the loss of alcohol that they get. So
a 2-year or a 3-year aged whiskey in Goa is a 12-year whiskey in Scotland, roughly.
We have been competing, our Brilliant Setted Bold have been competing with 18 and 22-year-old whiskeys and winning awards. And that's the reason we have not focused on the age. We do not believe that age determines quality. It's not that we do mention how old it is,
I don't see it on your...
But we don't highlight it because, earlier, everybody is like, okay, if it's, 12 years, it's good. If it's 18 years, it's better. If it's, 25 years, it's more, Of course, there is some relationship to it because the maturation process increases the flavors and reduce the alcohol, the pungency when you actually taste it. But, that can happen in any country. And slowly, if you see now, even Scottish brands have started removing the age statement. You will not find age statements in most of the bottles now, because I think the bluff has been called now. And not only us, there are countries like Japan and Taiwan, and all of them are producing excellent quality single malts. And they also have the same issue, the evaporation losses are higher, but they produce fantastic stuff at a younger age.
Yeah, and yeah, that's interesting. I think we've all had Japanese whiskeys. You mentioned to me last night Taiwan does great whiskeys, New Zealand. So I think there's this big renaissance of whiskey manufacturing outside of Scotland. But tell me, how are they being, I'll get to the consumer in a minute, but how are they being assessed by the experts? You said, tell us a little bit about some of the accolades, and what's your peer group there? Is it you against the traditional Scottish, or are there a lot of new age, new geography whiskies that are now coming up on the top from the expert panel?
Yeah, as far as good quality stuff is concerned, I think, of course, there are small distilleries in Scotland that do still continue to produce good stuff, but most of the, the runaway brands, I think they cater to the larger volume and, the more price conscious, run-of-the-mill stuff. But a lot of countries have started producing excellent stuff. You can go from even South America. The other day I was in a bar in Spain, and the bar guy gave me a taste of whiskey from Venezuela, a single malt. It was excellent.
Which is known for rum. I mean, it's a rum country.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and so surprise. And now even I think the US has changed the laws as far as single malt is concerned. Earlier, I think it had to be aged in new cask for it to be called a single malt in the US. They've recently changed the law, and they have also now allowed you to mature it in bourbon casks for it to be called single malt. So there are a lot of new distilleries that are coming up that are making fantastic stuff. So going forward, I think you will be able to see a lot of very good single malts coming out from all over the world.
So when did you launch, Paul John, the single malt? What was the year that you launched the whiskey?
If I remember right, I think it was around 2012, if I'm not mistaken. 2005-06, I started the manufacturing.
Yeah.
It took me about 4 or 5 years to actually start. I found the sweet spot of it really settling down after the 4th year. So at those days, for the Brilliant Edited Bold, I still stick to about a minimum of 6 years maturation. And of course, all the other ones, some of them are 8 years and 10 years also.
So, and I read somewhere, and I was talking to someone earlier today who's here, Gopal, and he mentioned that you started your marketing journey or selling your whiskey in the international markets first. So that's something that's really sort of caught my attention, and it's quite interesting. I'd love for you to share with the group on why you chose to sell abroad before you chose to sell in India.
Yeah, unfortunately, that heritage that the British ruled us for the 200 plus or 300 years, almost 300 years, we've all got so tuned that anything international is better or anything from abroad is better. That was one part of it. So even now, if you still see, okay, it's slowly changing, but so I needed to get the appreciation from the heart of the place where these things are being made, and so that's how I decided to launch in Europe first, and London was the pick. Of course, it was literally trying to bite the tiger's tail, but we did it. And over a period of time, I think it slowly started getting the recognition. And once we started spreading around in Europe and then moved on, and then when I figured out that it's being accepted well internationally, is then when I launched it in India, with a lot of the awards also.
Couple of years later, how many years?
It was around 5-6 years after I first launched in 2012 is when I launched internationally, and then around 2016-17 is when I started slowly launching in India.
And today, between the two markets, what's the sort of split between the two markets?
India has really taken to it very well. Of course, we've also launched the brand called Nirvana, which is a chill filter, the only chill filtered brand that I have with me at 40% alcohol strength at an affordable price. So that's again, it's India being a very price sensitive market. So India as a whole contributes about 60% of the single malt sales, and 40% is international sales now.
But coming to pricing now, where are you priced relative to?
Depending
I don't want to say equivalent. Depending to which state you're in.
Depending on the states, the flagship brands like the Brilliant Edited Bold can range anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 rupees.
Compared to a Glen or a Glenmorangie, what would be the comparison, and what would that cost?
I think probably maybe Glenfiddich in some states are I think slightly higher, and in some states, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're even cheaper than us.
Oh, really?
Even internationally also, I mean, we are priced either equal or higher than them. But of course, as I said, mine is a 46% non-chill filtered. There's a 40%, and of course, it's more on the brand legacy that they sell, and I'm trying to, focus mine on more on the quality.
And Paul, I know we talked about this a little bit last night at that fabulous dinner you hosted. Thank you for inviting us. About, the marketing efforts in India. Obviously, there's an embargo on advertising for alcohol. Out of all the markets that you're in, is this something that is, are there markets where you can advertise alcohol? And is that been a challenge on getting the word out there?
Yeah, definitely. In India, you cannot advertise openly. Of course, India being India.
By the way, that's why we're sitting here and having this conversation.
Yeah. And of course, India being India, you will have all sorts of alcoholic names selling CDs and water and soda. So, I mean, there is, but it's still there, getting more and more, regulated on that. There are a lot of codes that we cannot do. So, marketing, branding publicly is a challenge. There are a few countries in the world that do allow marketing of alcohol, which, for example, in the US and in some states, in some countries, even in Europe, you can actually advertise alcohol. There is no issue about it.
And which is your strongest market outside of India? A single strongest market?
France and the US are two good markets for us. Australia also has picked up now.
Yeah. And is that because your focus has been there, or are these inherently whiskey drinking? I didn't know France was a whiskey drinking.
Actually, France is the second largest single malt drinking country in the world after the US.
I did not know that.
But again, 95% is less than the €30 bottle which is sold in the supermarket. So for the first few years, we were breaking our heads that France is the second largest market and nothing was happening over there. Then when we start drilling down and you realize that 95% of those are sold at less than €30, which ours is about 45 to 50 euros. So the volumes come from that. But overall, yeah, France is a very big market. US, of course, by far is the largest market. But again, it's a combination of how we are able to market it, where, and every country has their own. Alcohol is a highly regulated business across the world, highly taxed. So they all have their own challenges. And if you are able to, pass through those challenges properly, then the volumes will pick up.
You're coming from India. I think are we the most challenging market, or is this par for the course when it comes to the alcohol industry across all markets?
No, I guess it's each country has its own issues, but there are challenges in alcohol in everywhere in the world.
Give us a little bit sense of the size of the market. I read somewhere that the gin, and I want to talk about your gin because I know you've launched one, but I'll get to that in a minute. But the gin and rum in India is a 1.2, 1.6 billion sort of dollar sales, sort of market size. Whiskey is almost at 10 times that size. It's about 18 billion. From your vantage point, I'd be interested, is whiskey a segment that's sort of slowing down relative to other spirits, or is the entire market, because it's obviously got a much larger base than some of the other spirits. I'd love to know what your thoughts are on the overall market, sort of, if you take a 4, 5, 7 year view, India specific.
Yeah, if I'm not right, I don't know. I think Vijay, sales head, is maybe a better person to. I think roughly about 300 million cases is the statistics of the Indian whiskey or the alcohol market in India. Am I correct, Vijay? Roughly around 275, 300 million cases. Yeah. But see, the problem is that a lot of the states, the accurate figures are not available. A lot of states still have country liquor, and that skews the complete volumes of alcohol business, because...
Is that not counted in this?
It's not counted in the whiskey. This is only the IML. If you look at it, I'd say 70% of this volume that they are actually declaring comes for the southern states. And all the southern states do not have country liquor. And it's very unlikely, Bihar, UP, and the larger population is in the northern states. So obviously, I think if you, add the country liquor volume, or then I think it should be 600, 700 million cases in a year. It's one of the largest markets for the whiskey, and 85% of the alcohol sold in the regulated package alcohol industry when it's counting out the country liquor, is whiskey. You know, most of the states are whiskey. You know, barring a few states like, you know, Andhra, Telangana, and the southern states like in Kerala, there's a little bit of rum and brandy that is being sold. But again, you know, it's the same. You know, as I mentioned earlier, it's all alcohol, molasses-based alcohol.
Molasses-based alcohol.
Or nowadays, there's a lot of grain-based distilleries also that have come up, and they put the color and then they sell it as whiskey or brandy.
My father's in the services, and I know buying alcohol from the canteen is something that you know, people from the services, and we all know that you know, they can hold their drinks quite well and drink a fair amount. But tell me, I understand that they are now not allowed, as of recently, not allowed to sell foreign liquor. Has that benefited you? Have you seen any sort of advantage playing out towards the Indian alcohol manufacturers because of that change?
Yes, definitely it has benefited us to a large extent, and one of the reasons some of our variants we are going to be, or rather we don't have the liquid, is because we started supplying to the canteen stores, and their demand is huge. And suddenly, you know, because these things are what I have, you know, put in 6 years ago is what I can sell. You know, unlike the cheaper brands, you know, if the demand goes up, I can just buy the alcohol, mix it, and the next morning I can give you what quantity you want. Unfortunately, these things, you know, whatever we had planned for 4 years or 6 years ago is only what we can. And so if you run short of it, it is going to be short till you.
That's a high quality problem.
And whatever expansions we are doing now will start showing results only after 6 years. So for the next 4 or 5 years, it's going to be a challenge.
It's going to be a challenge. And the last question on the regulation, I know I've been reading a lot about the trade deal that we're speaking with, you know, with the UK and Australia for that matter, of bringing down the trade duties. Is that something that's going to become a pain point for you going forward, or you think that's good? Competition's always good.
Yeah, I personally believe in the initial stages, like, you know, earlier, if you remember, when the petrol price goes up, you know, petrol, you know, you all stop driving for a few days, and then after that, you're back to square one. It's the same situation, you know, when the prices of the international brands come down, I am not at all scared, because I think the quality will ultimately start speaking. So even internationally, we've priced ourselves either in par or in higher, wherever required, with the larger brands. Yes, the trade agreements, their talks are going on. In fact, we've had, as an industry, we've had a lot of discussions with the ministers, and they've indicated to us that they are inclined to reduce the duty from, I think, 200 or 300% to 150% or 50%, 150% to 50%. So there will be some reduction in, and of course, now the big boys are all international players. The Pernod and Diageo, they've taken over the alcohol business. 80% of the alcohol business comes from these international brands. They are doing their homework to make sure that the prices of import is come down.
Is it Diageo who's just recently launched an Indian single malt?
Yes, Diageo has recently launched a single malt.
An Indian-made.
Yes, yes. They have got a distillery in Goa earlier, and now they've started making.
Tell us a little bit about now. I mean, you've conquered the single malt market. What's the next spirit on? I know you've got a gin that's available. Welcome, everyone should try it if you get a chance. But tell us a little bit about where you see the future in terms of product for you as a company.
I still believe that India is the future in the next 10 years or so. I mean, we're going to see an explosion in the ability of the people in India to spend money. And I think single malts is something that people will definitely graduate into. And honestly speaking, with my personal experiences, once you start drinking single malts, it's very difficult to get into any other normal whiskey. Of course, there are a lot of options in single malts, but I mean, that will continue to grow. Single malt still is my favorite, but we have we have an XO brandy. It's also available today. Probably that's something that I cannot call it cognac, because again, it is it's distilled in my same pot still distillation. Again, 46% non-chill filtered. Typically, you will get an XO also, which is 40%. Same story. So I think you should be able to find the difference in this. When you get a chance, please do try it out. But the problem is that the cost of distillation of juice from grape and then distilling alcohol from it, the cost is very high. So they sell about 15,000 rupees or 14,000 rupees for a bottle of the brandy.
Tell us about your Malhar gin, the story behind it, and why gin. I'm intrigued to know why you thought that that was the next natural step in terms of the. I'd like to know, is that what you see as the market opportunity?
I mean, there is a market opportunity, but I think, these are products that can be made reasonably easily. So there are a lot of players in it.
That's right. There's a lot of
there's a lot of players. There's a lot of, like how you would, for a long time, anybody and everybody that had a little bit of money got into making wine. It became a bloodbath. Everybody started selling schemes. Then it went from 1:1. Then it went to 1:2. And now, they will give you even 3 bottles if you pay for 1 bottle. And so, but then most of them, half of them die out. Some of them get bought over. But all of them are struggling. And my reading is that all these things are all novelties which will last for some time. The stronger ones will survive. Some will get bought over. And then I think it will settle down. But my intention of getting into gin is that I would like to have a portfolio of good quality, variety of stuff, from the wines to whiskey, gin, brandy. So that's the reason why I'm getting into most of it. Because again, in the business, there are these big daddies, they got tie up with the, hotels saying that, okay, exclusively put all my products. Fortunately, till now, they all didn't have an Indian single malt. So we were able to get in over there. But over a period of time, we'll be pushed out from that also if I don't build my portfolio. So I also need to start getting into tying up with saying that, okay, keep all my products and, those kind of things. So basically, it's more of a business strategy.
Business strategy, I get it. And one last question before I open it up to the crowd. I've been reading a little bit about sort of globally at least, and I don't know whether you've seen this and I'm sure you've seen it, but I'd love to get your views on it, that what's kind of having a rebirth amongst the spirits is that, I think gin was a 5-10-year-old story, then tequila became very popular. And I think what I'm hearing is rum is making a comeback. Is that something that you're seeing as well? I'm talking about a global level, and
Yeah, I believe that people are exploring into a lot of new things, like you mentioned, tequila and the thing. So rum will also be a part of it. A lot of people would like to experiment. We are also doing a lot of experiments on rum. Fortunately, earlier. The country, the government had actually very strict regulations on how sugar factories could make, and that you could only make alcohol from molasses and all those things. But recently the government has started allowing sugar factories to produce alcohol directly from cane juice. And typically rum should be from that, because when we make it from molasses, there's a lot of chemical process that goes into the process of making sugar, and they are all left in as the residue in the molasses, and that it infiltrates into the alcohol when you distill it. For example, especially in rum, you need little bit of those chemicals to give it that immediate kick. So, but nowadays you have a lot of refined, technology has improved in distilling alcohol, and the government has also now allowed you to actually extract sugarcane juice and then distill alcohol. So you bypass the process yeah. So going forward, you will start seeing good quality alcohol produced from sugarcane juice, which can be matured in casks, and I think you will get some good quality rum also.
Interesting. I'd like to open it up to questions. Any questions? Do you have your mic? You can take mine.
Yeah.
Actually, I had a stupid question. Basically, I've toured a lot around the world and had whiskeys, but I didn't know much about country liquor. So I'm sorry if I can ask you, because you said your father used to have a dealership. So just wanted to understand what's country liquor and what sort of...
Well, country liquor earlier used to be the lowest, cheapest form of alcohol, added water, and at some cases they would add some color. It's all the same stuff, brandy, whiskey, rum. But today it has all progressed to a level where even in country liquor they are making country liquor from the highest quality spirit from grain or molasses. The only difference is the taxation structure. So pure country liquor is just pure alcohol with water.
And it's no fancy branding and bottling.
No branding. I mean, nowadays, that is also there. In Maharashtra, for example, I think they have branded country liquors. So a lot of states have branded country liquor, but it's the same stuff. as I had explained to you earlier, brandy, whiskey and rum, if you're buying anything that is within the 1,500 rupees per bottle,
It's all ethanol.
so it's all the same stuff. It's just the quality of the alcohol that may come from a different distillery, but all of them are buying alcohol from all different distilleries and using it. So even a country liquor is buying the same alcohol, and even a 100 Peppers guy is buying the same alcohol and then using a little bit of, in some cases they use some high bouquet spirit, maybe 5%, 10%, they add it to it and then brand the label. It's basically, the branding of the
Sorry,
label.
what is the taxation benefit? They don't pay taxes, or they're...
Country liquors, they have a different method of calculation itself. It's not calculated. So it's generally on a lower slab. So it is affordable and it's taxed lower. Across the country, that's the same. In the states, there is country liquor. That is why most of the states have removed the country liquor, especially in the southern states, none of them have country liquor, because they are actually, in effect, they are actually losing revenue by allowing country liquor. Yes.
How did your association with happen? And just wanted to know that part of the story. I've got Michael's side.
Again, Michael,
Can you repeat that question so that...
Michael is the head distiller, so I just
master distiller at JDL. Again, as, we've had no background of training of manufacturing process, nothing. Michael, was with my dad in the early days when he's from Coog, and my dad had his retail shops in Coog. And he joined my dad, and I inherited him from my dad when I started the alcohol business. He came in to help me in some of the manufacturing process. And then during the course of the business, Michael was looking after, I had some liquor wholesale shops, so he was in charge of that. Then when we went to Andhra, we had tied up with the distillery to manufacture spirit and the IML, so he was in charge over there. But it is purely based on his personal initiative none of us have had any experience in pot stills, manufacturing single malts, making it, but it's just all self-learned, self-taught, traveling, talking to people, and doing whatever experiments we did. And then, we've reached that. So my association with Michael has been for the last, I would say, as soon as I got into the alcohol business.
Beautiful partnership. Second question is, what intrigued me is 98% of rum apparently is only sold in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And what intrigued me was Tamil Nadu and Kerala are actually not cold states. Normally you
associated with being in cold.
Exactly. So brandy, sorry. Oh, not rum, brandy I meant. And brandy is normally, it's cold. Like Bombay currently is 15 degrees, so you want to have some brandy. Why is that? Is there a reason? Because I thought North would be the reason where brandy would sell. Why is it 98% only in Tamil Nadu and Kerala?
The power of marketing and instill the British thing that got into everybody's mind. It's the same stuff. It's, if you put a whiskey flavor, it's only whiskey. So it's just that people are so used to drinking brandy and, it's monkey see, monkey do, and, it's been carrying on. But that's all. And if you don't have brandy, you give them whiskey, they will drink the whiskey also. So that it has changed now. Earlier it was a very strong brandy market, but today it has changed to become a whiskey market. And vice versa also. There are a lot of places that think.
One last question, I'm sure other people have. I could see when you started also you were telling people, so I could see the passion that, how the whiskey should be had. Because I get frustrated, because how frustrated do you get that people don't value Indian single malts on the same, though it's even better than the other single malts which we have from Scotland. I get frustrated. How frustrated do you get?
No, at times I would say it's more disheartening to see it. I would not say frustrated, but as I was mentioning to somebody earlier, my job now is to actually, especially in India, is to teach people how to drink single malt rather than promoting my brand. Because if I can get a person to drink single malt the way it should be actually tasted, then 80% of my job is done. Because single malts are, as you've known, it's got its own, strengths, and there's no looking back if you get it right. So, so that's a challenge, but it's changing, which is good. And I think over a period of time, people will, start seeing it. And the good part is that India is such a huge whiskey drinking country. And we just need to tweak that part of, not adding the soda and the water, and then my job is done. Even if I get to, 15% of those people, I will not be able to supply it, how much ever I expand, the kind of population that we have. So, so that's a good part of looking at it in that way. And so I need to do a lot more of liquid on lip program. We have something called a liquid on lip. We need to gather people and then teach them how to do, and then make sure that, because initially it is difficult also because they're so used to it. Because I'll give you a small example, when I started making single malts, good single malt, and then, I decided that one day I'll go and give it to because my dad is a big fan of Royal Salute, if any big person would come, he would take out his Royal Salute and he would give them a little drink, and he continues to do that. So I thought, okay, I'll teach him, this is. So I went, and then he wanted to pour his, the soda, everything. So I told him, no, that's not how you drink it. Then he's telling me, you want to teach your dad how to drink alcohol? So I said, fine, you do what you want. So, sometimes it's a challenge, and even now when I go and come back, I get him a Royal Salute, and I give him the Royal Salute, So, sometimes some people you can't change, you got to give up on it. But there is a large part of the Indian population is still very young. 65% of the Indian population is within that 30-35 years range. So, there's a lot of potential where we can actually mold them into this, and they're traveling a lot more, unlike in the last 20 years ago. So I think we have a great future. I just need to get people to drink single malt the way it should be had.
Liquid to lip. One last question. There's this whole debate about aging, and you mentioned that. My only thing is, frankly, at 15 or 18 years, as we have seen, there is that perfect spot which sometimes whiskey reaches. Are you seeing more because of commercialization that people are moving away from the age, or is there something more to it? In the sense that there's so much demand now that you'd rather remove the age and get product out to the market faster.
No, I strongly believe that age does not determine quality. So, you can produce, for example, Mithuna is between 6 to 8 years matured.
But 6 to 8 in Goa.
Yeah.
So that's.
So I'm saying, but
that's 25 to 30 years.
Yeah. So over a period of time, I think people will, and it's already started now. Most including Scotland. If you see, they've now slowly started getting it out of it. So I don't think that's going to be a problem. People do now realize that you can make good quality alcohol even if it's not matured for the 30 years and 40 years. But over a period of time, if you mature it for too long, then it gets too woody and it's not palatable also. So we have to be very careful, we need to take it out from that cask, put it into a fifth fill cask. So there's a lot of stuff that has to go into it. We are playing around with, a lot of money, and some small mistake can, go wrong also. But yeah, in India, if you keep it for too long without making any shift into another lower barrels, then it could be a problem.
Paul, I have a question. Talking about casks, I didn't ask you. Obviously, it's an important part of the maturing process of alcohol. How globally, how difficult is it to get your hands on good casks? I'd be interested to, or is it not a problem?
No, it's a cycle. Cask, I remember when I first started buying casks, it used to cost me about $28 in the US.
$28 per cask.
$28
and this is about a 500.
No, 200, 220 liter casks. And then when there's a scarcity, it can go up to $160, $170 also. So it's a demand and supply. This thing currently it's now shot up to $150. You can buy a no cask at $200. So a used cask is, but then so its availability now is little scarce. People are struggling to get casks, but it's a cycle.
Hi, great to see you today, Paul. So, one of the reasons why the international players stopped putting age on some of their products was as demand grew in the last 20, 30 years of globalization, there was need to produce more. But if you age it all for that minimum duration, A, you need to wait for that time, and two, it costs a lot of money because you're holding valuable inventory, right? So therefore, they use great marketing to convince all of us that without the age, it's just as good. And like you're saying, it probably is just as good, and I'm sure you're right. I think my question for you is that as an entrepreneur who's self-funding this business, you're not part of these large conglomerates, right? And with such a high angel share, right? How do you isn't that a challenge for your growth of your business? Because obviously you're growing the volumes, you want to cater to more consumers in India and internationally. But if 8-10% is evaporating every year and you've got to hold it, how do you fund the inventory cost? Because that's a big problem in this business, right?
Thanks to Ranjit and Gaja Capital, they came in at some point in time, and you're right, it's very capital intensive. We needed a lot of money, and that's when I decided that I take some private equity, and that's how Gaja Capital was invested with us for a long time, and then they exited, and now Sazerac from the US has taken some stake in the bought over their stake. So we do have I had to raise funds to continue this growth. I expanded. I first put up my plant was of course it is a 3,000 liter per day installed capacity, but because of the quality that I want, I take out only 2,000 liters, basically in the sense, making sure that I don't, put excess steam and push more alcohol out. So basically I used to take out 2,000 liters per day production, and then as demand grew and once things started firming up, I doubled it to 4,000, and currently we are on an expansion now. In fact, the factory is, closed as far as the production part is concerned, because we are expanding from 4 to 8,000 liters per day. But yes, it's very capital intensive, and we need to keep getting more funds.
Is it the infrastructure, or is it the inventory and the
everything? The infrastructure is the easy part.
That's the easy
it's
part,
the inventory, the cost, the storing, and everything is a large part of it.
One of the things that you find in India is that there is no glassware that is suitable for whiskey tasting. Typically, I try to get a whiskey tasting glass. It's just you don't have the type of glasses. So is there any thought process around that, in that lip to liquid plan of yours, to sort of put, meaning these glasses actually are like, you miss the...
Yeah, correct. I mean, as you progress into these things, but you can get very nice glasses. Of course, I don't think they're made in India, but it is available. It's the only thing that you have to pay a price for it.
We'll increase the membership fees and buy some glasses for you.
All the international brands, they have it. There are a lot of... it is possible. You can get it.
Listen, I think, Paul, thanks very much for taking the time and sharing your story. And it's great to see an Indian brand, making the waves that Paul John has done in the international markets and India. And we wish you all the very best. And once again, thanks for doing this. And please come back and spend some time with us. I for one, I think I'm going to drink more Paul John and definitely carry it for visitors when I go abroad, because this is something that we should be proud of in the country, to have really good products. So well done. And again, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.